When my daughter-in-law called me selfish for not babysitting her kids every day, I thought I'd heard it all. But when she added, "Good luck seeing your grandkids again," it hit differently. What she didn't expect, though, was how I would respond, and the chain of events that followed shocked her more than anyone else. When my son, Jake, and his wife, Emily, first asked me to babysit their two kids, I was ecstatic. I'd been looking forward to grandparenthood for years, and the thought of spending more time with my grandkids felt like a dream come true. Their laughter, their messy little crafts, and the way their faces lit up when I read their favorite bedtime stories, it filled my heart in ways I couldn't describe. At first, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. I went over twice a week, helping out while Jake worked late or Emily ran errands. We made cookies, built forts, and spent hours on the living room floor playing with toy dinosaurs. Those moments were priceless, and I cherished them. But before long, the requests started coming more frequently. 2 days a week turned into 3, then 4. "Can you swing by on Monday? I just need to grab a few things. Would you mind watching the kids on Wednesday? I have a last-minute appointment." The casual requests became a pattern, and the pattern began to feel like an expectation. I didn't mind helping, I loved my grandkids after all, but the constant calls were starting to wear on me. Emily would text first thing in the morning, her messages dripping with urgency. "The kids are asking for you," or "I'm in a bind. Can you come over?" It became harder and harder to say no, especially when she made me feel like the only thing standing between her and chaos. One day, after a particularly exhausting week, I decided to speak up. Emily had just called to ask if I could come over again, and I hesitated before answering. "Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I love helping out, but I need some time for myself, too. Maybe we can figure out a schedule that works for everyone." Her response was quick, almost dismissive. "Oh, of course we understand," she said with a forced smile I could practically hear through the phone. "We'll make sure to give you a break." I hung up, feeling relieved that I'd finally spoken up. But the relief didn't last long. The very next week, the calls started again, just as frequent, and just as urgent. By the end of that month, I realized I'd gone from an excited grandmother to an unpaid, full-time babysitter. My days were no longer my own. They revolved around Emily's needs and the kids' schedules. One afternoon, as I sat on their couch folding laundry while the kids napped, I had a moment of clarity. This wasn't sustainable. I loved my family, but I couldn't continue like this without burning out. I tried bringing it up to Jake later that evening when he dropped me off at home. "Jake, I love helping, but I think we need to set some boundaries. I need to find a balance." He looked at me with that uncomfortable half-smile he gets when he doesn't want to have a hard conversation. "I get it, Mom. Emily and I will talk about it." But as the days passed and nothing changed, I started to wonder if they really did understand, or if I was just being taken for granted. By the time Friday rolled around, I was running on fumes. I'd spent the entire week at Jake and Emily's house, cooking, cleaning, and keeping the kids entertained. Every day started with a text or call from Emily, and it usually went something like this: "Good morning. Are you free today? The kids would love to see you." What started as 2 or 3 days a week had ballooned into full-time babysitting without me even realizing it. This week alone, I'd handled tantrums, scraped knees, meal prep, and endless loads of laundry while Emily flitted in and out of the house. She said she was running errands, but I'd noticed a few shopping bags from boutique stores piling up in the corner. It wasn't just errands. She was using the time for herself. By Friday evening, I was exhausted. As Jake pulled into my driveway to drop me off, I knew I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. I had to say something. "Jake," I began as he shifted the car into park, "I'm happy to help with the kids, but this week has been too much. I need some balance." He glanced at me, his face tightening with that uncomfortable expression I'd seen so many times before. "I know, Mom," he said with a sigh. I didn't realize it had gotten so overwhelming. "I'll talk to Emily about it." "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. I could tell he was trying to be supportive, but I also knew Jake hated confrontation. If he brought it up to Emily at all, it would probably be in the gentlest, vaguest way possible. Still, I allowed myself a glimmer of hope. Maybe now things would finally change. Maybe they'd understand that I needed time for myself, too. But that hope was short-lived. The very next morning, my phone buzzed early, too early for a weekend. Sure enough, it was Emily. "Good morning," her message began, cheerful as always. "I hate to bother you, but could you come over for just a couple of hours? I have some errands to run, and the kids have been asking for you." I stared at the screen, torn between frustration and guilt. After everything I'd said to Jake the night before, here Emily was, asking for my help yet again. I wanted to say no, but then she sent a follow-up text. Honestly, I don't know how we'd manage without you. You're such a lifesaver. The guilt tripping was subtle, but it worked. I found myself reluctantly typing out a response. Sure, I'll be there soon. By the time I arrived at their house, I was already annoyed with myself for giving in. Emily greeted me at the door, her phone in one hand and her purse in the other. You're a saint, she said, giving me a quick hug before heading out. I'll be back in a couple of hours. A couple of hours turned into 5. When Emily finally returned, she didn't even acknowledge the fact that she'd been gone longer than she said she would. Instead, she handed me a latte as if that would make up for it and said, "The kids love having you here. I don't know what we'd do without you." I didn't respond, but inside, I felt the frustration bubbling over. This wasn't a one-off favor anymore. This was a full-blown expectation, and it was taking over my life. That evening, I tried to decompress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being taken advantage of. I loved my grandkids more than anything, but this arrangement was no longer about spending quality time with them. It felt transactional, like I was being used as free childcare. I thought back to what Jake had said the night before. I'll talk to Emily. Had he even brought it up? Or had she brushed it off the way she always did? As I sat there, replaying the week in my head, I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep sacrificing my time and energy while being made to feel guilty for wanting a break. The breaking point was looming, and I knew I had to find the strength to stand my ground, even if it meant risking conflict. The morning started like every other day that week, with my phone buzzing far too early. I reached for it groggily, already dreading what I knew would be another request. Sure enough, Emily's name lit up the screen. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, her tone overly bright. "The kids have been asking for you. Can you come by today? I have a million things to do, and it would be such a big help." I sat up in bed, staring at the wall as her words hung in the air. Normally, I would have caved immediately, suppressing my frustration for the sake of keeping the peace. But today was different. I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized how drained I was physically, emotionally, and mentally. Taking a deep breath, I finally said the one thing I hadn't allowed myself to say since this all began. "I can't today, Emily. I have plans." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and deafening. It lasted just long enough to make me second-guess myself. "Plans?" Emily said finally, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're retired. What could you possibly have planned that's more important than your grandkids?" The guilt hit like a wave, but I forced myself to hold firm. "Emily," I began, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage, "I've been at your house every day this week. I love the kids, but I need time for myself, too." Her tone shifted from disbelief to irritation. "Time for yourself?" she repeated, her words practically dripping with disdain. "You have all the time in the world. Jake and I are doing everything we can to keep things afloat, and you're worried about me time?" The comment stung, but I refused to back down. "Emily, I've been happy to help, but this can't keep going like this. I need balance, and I'm asking you to respect that." That's when she snapped. "You're so selfish," she hissed, her cheerful facade now completely gone. "Do you even care about your family? Good luck seeing your grandkids again, if this is how you're going to act." And with that, she hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. Her words echoed in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. Selfish? Don't care about your family? Good luck seeing your grandkids again? A part of me wanted to call her back, to defend myself or try to explain my side. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly simmering with resentment for months, felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I had set a boundary. Still, the aftermath was hard to process. The thought of not seeing my grandkids broke my heart, and Emily's threat loomed large in my mind. Would she really keep them away from me? Was this the start of something worse? Later that day, I tried to distract myself with chores, but my mind kept wandering back to the conversation. I wondered if Jake knew what she'd said to me. Would he even take my side if he did? By the time evening rolled around, I had resolved to talk to Jake about it. I didn't want to make the situation worse, but I couldn't let this slide, either. Emily's behavior wasn't just unfair, it was hurtful. And I needed to know where my son stood in all of this. When Jake called that evening, I brought it up gently. "Jake," I said, "Emily and I had a conversation earlier, and I think we need to talk about boundaries." His voice immediately grew cautious. "What happened?" I explained the situation as calmly as I could, careful not to place blame, but firm in expressing how hurt I felt. Jake listened quietly, but I could sense his discomfort. "Mom," he said after a pause, "Emily's been really stressed lately. I think she just feels like she has a lot on her plate, and she doesn't know how to handle it." "And I understand that," I replied. "But Jake, I can't be the solution to everything. I've been helping as much as I can, but I have my limits. You and Emily need to figure out how to manage without relying on me all the time." Jake sighed. "I'll talk to her," he promised. "We'll figure something out." But as the call ended, I couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Would he actually talk to her? And if he did, would it make any difference? The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Emily didn't call or text, and Jake's messages were brief and impersonal. The silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I missed my grandkids terribly, but I knew I couldn't cave now. If I did, I'd be right back where I started, trapped in a cycle of overcommitment and guilt. It was a turning point, but it didn't feel like a victory. Instead, it felt like I was bracing myself for whatever was going to come next. After Emily's explosive reaction, I sat in stunned silence, replaying her words in my head. Good luck seeing your grandkids again. Had she really meant it? Could she actually follow through on such a cruel threat? The weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just dealing with an overworked mother venting her frustrations. Emily had crossed a line. The thought of being cut off from my grandkids because I dared to say no for the first time filled me with a mix of sadness and anger. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the anxiety. I wanted to believe that Emily had just spoken out of frustration, but what if she hadn't? What if she was serious? That evening, I decided to call Jake. If there was anyone who could mediate and bring some reason to this situation, it was him. As the phone rang, I rehearsed what I was going to say, determined to keep the conversation calm and constructive. "Hey, Mom," Jake answered, his tone wary. He must have already known something was wrong. "Hi, Jake," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you about what happened with Emily earlier. She was upset, and I think we need to clear the air." Jake sighed on the other end of the line, the kind of sigh that said he wasn't looking forward to this conversation. "Yeah, she told me about it. She feels like you're pulling away from us." His words hit me like a slap. "Pulling away?" I repeated, incredulous. "Jake, I've been at your house nearly every day for months. I've given up my time, my plans, everything to help you too. How can she think I'm pulling away?" "I know, Mom," Jake said quickly, his tone placating. "I know how much you've done for us. But Emily feels like you're setting limits. And I guess she took that as you not wanting to be involved anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jake, setting limits doesn't mean I don't love you or the kids. It means I need balance. I'm happy to help, but I can't be everything all the time." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I get that," Jake said finally. "I really do. But Emily's been under a lot of stress lately. She feels like she's doing everything, and when you said no, it just hit her harder than it should have." I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the way he was trying to walk the line between defending his wife and acknowledging my feelings. I didn't blame him for that. It was a tough position to be in. But it still hurt to know that Emily's reaction had put him in the middle. "Jake, I understand that Emily is stressed," I said, my tone softening. "But her stress doesn't give her the right to lash out at me or threaten to keep the kids away. That's not fair, and it's not okay." "I know," he said quietly. "I'll talk to her. I'll make sure she knows that what she said was out of line." "Thank you," I replied, though I wasn't entirely convinced it would make a difference. As we ended the call, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that Jake was willing to address the issue, but also frustration at the lingering tension. I didn't want this to turn into a long-term rift, but I also knew I couldn't let myself be manipulated or guilt-tripped anymore. Over the next few days, the silence was deafening. Emily didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. I wanted to give them space to process, but the lack of communication felt like a punishment. One afternoon, while running errands, I bumped into a friend who knew both families. "I heard there was some drama with Emily," she said, her tone cautious. "Is everything okay?" I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "She's been telling people you refuse to help her with the kids anymore," my friend explained. "She said you've been pulling away, and she doesn't know what to do." I was floored. Emily wasn't just upset. She was painting me as the villain to anyone who would listen. The anger I'd been holding back began to bubble to the surface. That evening, I decided enough was enough. I sat down and wrote a message to both Jake and Emily, laying out my thoughts as clearly and calmly as I could. I love you both, and I adore my grandkids, I began. But I need to make something very clear. Saying no doesn't mean I'm pulling away. It means I'm setting boundaries, so I can be the best version of myself for you and the kids. I can't be at your house every day, and I can't continue to feel guilty for wanting time for myself. I hope you can understand that. I hit send, my heart pounding. For the first time, I felt like I was truly standing up for myself, even if it meant risking more conflict. As the message was delivered, I couldn't help but wonder what the fallout would be. Would they finally understand where I was coming from, or would this only escalate the tension further? Only time would tell. The days following my confrontation with Emily were some of the hardest I'd experienced in a long time. The once familiar buzz of my phone, Emily's daily requests and pictures of my grandkids, was now conspicuously absent. Jake's messages, when they came, were clipped and formal, offering no window into how Emily was feeling or what they decided after our last conversation. I told myself the silence was a blessing. It meant space, distance, and time to recharge. But it didn't feel like a blessing, it felt like punishment. I missed the chaos of my grandkids' laughter, their tiny hands pulling me into games, and their squeals of delight when we baked cookies together. Emily's threat echoed in my mind. Good luck seeing your grandkids again. It felt like a chess match where I was the only one who didn't know the rules. If I caved, I'd be back to juggling everything with no end in sight. If I stood firm, I risked losing the connection to my family entirely. One afternoon, I decided to take my mind off things by running errands. As I wandered through the grocery store, trying to focus on my shopping list, I spotted a familiar face, Laura, a mutual friend of both mine and Emily's. Hi. Laura greeted me warmly, though there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. After a bit of small talk, she said, I've been meaning to ask, is everything okay between you and Emily? I froze, my hand hovering over a box of crackers. Why do you ask? I replied cautiously. Well, Laura began, shifting uncomfortably. She mentioned to a few people that you've stopped helping with the kids. She said it's been really hard on her and Jake, and, she implied that you're pulling away because you don't care about family anymore. I felt a wave of anger and hurt crash over me. It wasn't enough for Emily to give me the cold shoulder. She was spreading this twisted version of the truth to anyone who would listen. Is that what she said? I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Laura hesitated before nodding. I just thought you should know. I know how much you love those kids, so it didn't sound like you. I thanked Laura and finished my shopping, but my mind was spinning. By the time I got home, the anger had settled into something more resolute. I couldn't control what Emily was saying about me, but I could control how I responded. It was time to draw a line, not just for myself, but for the sake of my relationship with Jake and my grandkids. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my laptop. I began drafting a message to both Jake and Emily, carefully choosing my words to be firm but loving. I want to start by saying how much I love you both and how much I adore the kids, I wrote. But I need to address something that's been weighing on me. I've heard that there's been talk about me refusing to help or pulling away from the family. That couldn't be further from the truth. My love for all of you hasn't changed, and it never will. That said, I need to make something very clear. I've been feeling overwhelmed. I've given as much of myself as I can, but I'm only one person. I've been helping because I love you, not because it's an obligation. But I can't continue at the pace we were going. I need time for myself, and I need my boundaries to be respected. I'm always here for you when you truly need me, but I won't tolerate being manipulated or guilt anymore. I hope we can move forward in a way that works for all of us, because the last thing I want is for this to cause a permanent rift. I reread the message several times before hitting send, my hands trembling slightly. Once it was delivered, I sat back and let out a shaky breath. It wasn't easy to put my feelings into words, but it felt good to finally take control of the narrative. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't know how Jake and Emily would respond, but I knew I had done what was right for me. I wasn't playing the villain in their story anymore. I was just a grandmother setting healthy boundaries. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. But as I drifted off, I couldn't help but wonder, would they listen? Or would this only widen the divide? The next morning, I was going about my routine, still processing the message I'd sent to Jake and Emily the night before. My emotions were all over the place. Relief that I'd spoken my truth, anxiety about how they'd respond, and sadness over how strained things had become. The silence from their end continued, which only deepened my doubts. Had I done the right thing? What if drawing this line pushed them further away? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of my phone ringing. When I saw the name on the screen, I froze. Linda, Emily's mother. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. Emily's mom and I had always gotten along well enough, but we weren't particularly close. What could she want now, in the middle of all this drama? "Hi, Linda," I said cautiously, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hi," she replied, her tone surprisingly warm. "I hope this isn't a bad time. I wanted to check in with you." My stomach tightened. "Check-ins? I heard about what's been going on," she said gently. "Emily mentioned some of it, and I could tell she was upset. But honestly, I think you're in the right." I was so taken aback, I didn't know how to respond. Linda, sensing my hesitation, continued. "Look, I love my daughter, but I know how she can be. She's always been, well, intense. She has this need to control everything, and when things don't go her way, she doesn't always handle it well." Her words were like a weight lifting off my chest. Finally, someone who understood. "It's been tough," I admitted, my voice tinged with relief. "I love them all so much, but I felt like I was being taken for granted. When I tried to set boundaries, Emily acted like I didn't care about the family anymore." Linda sighed. "That sounds like Emily. She has a hard time letting go of control and relying on others in a healthy way. I think she's so used to people giving in to her that when someone doesn't, it feels like a betrayal." We spent the next hour talking, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I didn't feel alone. Linda shared stories about Emily growing up, how she'd always been the one to take charge of group projects or insist things be done her way. "It's a strength in some ways," Linda said, "but it can also be a weakness. She doesn't always realize when she's asking too much or pushing people away." Hearing that gave me a new perspective. While it didn't excuse Emily's behavior, it helped me see where she was coming from. Maybe her reaction wasn't about me at all. It was about her own insecurities and struggles. Linda's encouragement was exactly what I needed. "You're doing the right thing," she told me firmly. "Stand your ground. If you keep giving in, it'll only reinforce the idea that she can push people past their limits. She needs to hear this, even if it's hard for her." By the time we hung up, I felt stronger than I had in weeks. Linda's words gave me the reassurance I needed to stick to my boundaries without guilt. Knowing that someone so close to Emily could see my side made me believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. For the first time, I felt like I had an ally in this situation. And while I didn't know what the future held, I was beginning to feel hopeful that Emily and I could find common ground. But as I went about the rest of my day, I couldn't help but wonder how Emily would react when she realized her own mother agreed with me. Would it help her see things differently? Or would it only make things worse? A week had passed since I sent my message to Jake and Emily, and while the silence from their end lingered, I'd started to adjust to the quiet. It hurt not seeing my grandkids, but I stayed firm, knowing I needed to hold my ground. That Saturday morning, I was sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea, enjoying the rare peace and quiet, when I heard a knock at the door. Surprised, I wasn't expecting anyone. I set my cup down and opened the door to find Jake standing there with the kids in tow. "They missed you," he said sheepishly, his tone tentative. Before I could respond, the kids bolted past him and into the house, their laughter filling the space that had felt so empty all week. "Grandma," they shouted in unison, wrapping their little arms around my legs. My heart swelled at the sight of them, and I knelt down to hug them tightly, blinking back tears. Jake stepped inside and closed the door behind him, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. He glanced around awkwardly before gesturing toward the couch. "Can we talk for a minute?" I nodded, ushering the kids toward the living room with some coloring books to keep them occupied while Jake and I sat down at the kitchen table. "Mom," he began, his hands clasped in front of him, "I'm sorry for how things have been lately. I talked to Emily and we've been working through some things. She knows she went too far." His words took me by surprise. "You did?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Jake nodded, his gaze earnest. "She's been really stressed, but that's not an excuse for the way she treated you. I told her that what she said about keeping the kids from you was out of line. She knows she crossed a line." I leaned back in my chair, relief washing over me. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "I've been so worried about this, about you, about the kids, about what all of this might mean for our family." Jake's expression softened. "I know, Mom. And I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I hate that it got to this point. We talked for a while longer, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same page. Jake's acknowledgement of Emily's behavior, and his own role in letting things escalate, was a step in the right direction. Later that evening, as I was tidying up after dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Emily. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Hi," she said when I picked up, her voice quieter than usual. "I wanted to call and say I'm sorry." Her words took me off guard, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. "I didn't realize how much I was asking of you," she continued. "It wasn't fair, and I'm sorry for the way I acted." There was a sincerity in her tone that I hadn't heard before. She sounded genuinely remorseful, and while part of me wanted to hold on to the hurt and frustration I'd felt, another part of me recognized the effort it must have taken for her to make this call. "Thank you, Emily," I said finally. "That means a lot to me. I love you and Jake and the kids, but I needed to set those boundaries for my own well-being. I hope you understand that." "I do," she replied. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I see now that I was putting too much on you. I promise I'll do better." Her words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. While I wasn't ready to forget everything that had happened, I appreciated her apology and the effort she was making to mend things. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a cautious sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect, but it felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. For the first time in weeks, I felt like our family could truly begin to heal. And as I sat down to play with my grandkids, their laughter echoing through the house, I knew it had all been worth it. Setting boundaries wasn't easy, but it was the best thing I could have done for myself, and for them. The weeks following Emily's apology were a delicate balancing act, but they marked the beginning of something better. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was clear that we were all making an effort to mend what had been broken. Emily reached out to me a few days after her initial apology to ask if we could talk. This time, the conversation wasn't laced with frustration or entitlement. Instead, she genuinely wanted to find a way forward. "I know I've put a lot on you," she admitted when we sat down together at my kitchen table. "And I know I haven't always been fair about it. But I really do appreciate everything you've done for us. I guess I got overwhelmed, and I didn't know how to handle it." Her vulnerability caught me off guard, but it also opened the door for a real conversation about boundaries. "Emily," I said gently, "I love you, and the kids more than anything. I want to help, but I also need to take care of myself. I need a balance, and I think we can find one that works for everyone." We spent the next hour discussing how I could continue to be involved without feeling overburdened. Instead of the daily calls and last-minute requests, we agreed on a set schedule, 2 afternoons a week and the occasional weekend when needed. It felt manageable, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like my time was being taken for granted. Jake joined us toward the end of the conversation, and I was pleasantly surprised by how proactive he was. "I need to step up, too," he said. "I've been leaving too much on Emily's plate, and it's not fair to either of you. From now on, I'm going to be more involved with the kids' schedules and helping around the house." Hearing Jake take responsibility was a turning point. It wasn't just about setting boundaries with Emily anymore, it was about reshaping the dynamic within their household. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a real difference. The daily barrage of calls and texts from Emily stopped, replaced by friendly check-ins that felt thoughtful rather than urgent. On the days I babysat, I found myself genuinely enjoying the time with my grandkids, free from the exhaustion and resentment that had crept in before. Jake's changes were noticeable too. He started leaving work on time more often, taking over bath time with the kids, and making sure Emily had breaks when she needed them. It was clear that he was committed to lightening the load, and Emily seemed less stressed as a result. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Emily turned to me and said, "This feels so much better, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, smiling. "I think we've finally found a rhythm that works for all of us." For the first time in months, I felt like I had my life back, not just as a grandmother, but as myself. I started filling my free days with hobbies I'd neglected, like gardening and painting. I reconnected with old friends and even joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do, but never felt I had the time for. The changes also deepened my relationship with my grandkids. When I was with them, I was fully present, no longer distracted by exhaustion or frustration. They seemed to sense the difference too, their laughter brighter and their hugs tighter than ever. Of course, it wasn't a perfect system. There were still moments when Emily slipped back into old habits, calling to ask for just one more favor. But those moments were rare, and when they happened, I felt empowered to say no without guilt. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, reflecting on how far we'd come, I realized something important. This new arrangement wasn't just about boundaries. It was about respect. Respect for my time, my needs, and my role in the family. I hadn't just regained my life. I'd redefined it. And in doing so, I'd helped reshape our family dynamic into something healthier and more sustainable. It wasn't easy getting to this point, but as I looked at the pictures of my grandkids on the mantel, I knew it had been worth every difficult conversation. For the first time, I felt like we were all on the same team, and that was the greatest gift of all. Trust is one of those things that takes years to build, seconds to break, and seemingly forever to rebuild. After everything that had happened, I knew it would take time before I could fully believe that the changes Emily and Jake promised would last. But little by little, Emily began to show me that she was serious about making things better. For starters, the daily calls and last-minute requests stopped almost entirely. I no longer woke up to a barrage of texts asking if I could just swing by or help out for a few hours. Instead, Emily stuck to our agreed-upon schedule, and if something came up unexpectedly, she would ask me well in advance if I had time. And if I said no, she respected it. It was such a stark contrast to the months of overstepping that I almost didn't know how to respond. At first, I was guarded, half expecting her to revert to old habits. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to relax. Emily was making an effort, and that effort didn't go unnoticed. One of the biggest changes was how Emily and I interacted outside of babysitting. For so long, our relationship had revolved around her needs and my availability. But as things began to shift, so did the nature of our time together. One morning, she called, not to ask for help, but to invite me out for coffee. "I just thought it would be nice to catch up," she said, her voice light and friendly. I hesitated, surprised by the offer. "Sure," I said finally, curious to see where this would lead. When we met at the cafe, I was struck by how different Emily seemed. She wasn't frazzled or demanding. She was relaxed and genuinely interested in hearing about my life. We talked about everything from the kids' milestones to my new book club, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw her as more than just a stressed-out mother. I saw her as a person. These outings became a regular occurrence. Sometimes we'd grab lunch, other times we'd take a walk in the park while the kids played. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when old frustrations bubbled to the surface, and I had to remind myself to let go of the past. But overall, it felt like we were building something new, something better. The changes weren't just in how Emily treated me, they were evident in how she managed her own life. With Jake stepping up and taking on more responsibilities, Emily seemed lighter, happier, and more in control. She no longer carried the weight of everything on her shoulders, and that shift had a ripple effect on everyone around her. Most importantly, I saw how much happier the kids were. They loved having a grandmother who was fully present when she was with them, not someone who was burned out and running on empty. Our time together was more meaningful because it was balanced. It wasn't about filling a need. It was about enjoying each other's company. One afternoon, as I sat on the floor playing a board game with my grandkids, Emily walked into the room and paused in the doorway. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. I looked up at her, surprised. "For what?"
"For sticking with us," she said.
"Even when I wasn't making it easy. I know I messed up, and I'm so grateful you didn't give up on me. Or on us." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Emily," I said, "I've never stopped loving you or the kids. I just needed you to see me as more than a solution to a problem.
And now?
I feel like we're finally getting there." She nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and gratitude.
"We are," she said.
As the months went by, the changes became our new normal. Our family felt stronger, our connections deeper, and our time together more meaningful. It wasn't always perfect. There were still moments of miscommunication or frustration, but we'd learned how to navigate those moments with patience and understanding. Looking back, I realized that rebuilding trust isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to move forward despite it. Emily had made mistakes, and so had I. But together, we'd found a way to repair what had been broken, and in doing so, we'd built something even stronger. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just like a grandmother, but like a valued member of the family. And that, more than anything, was worth every difficult conversation and every hard-earned step forward. As I sit in my garden on a sunny afternoon, watching the wind ripple through the flowers I'd finally had time to plant, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. What started as a whirlwind of guilt, frustration, and exhaustion had transformed into a lesson I never expected to learn so late in life: the power of boundaries. Saying no wasn't easy, and the fallout from that decision tested my resolve in ways I hadn't anticipated. But looking back now, I realize it wasn't just about me. It was about teaching Emily and Jake the importance of balance, respect, and shared responsibility. It was about showing them that love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself entirely. It means being honest about your limits and trusting that the people who love you will respect them. The changes didn't happen overnight, and there were moments when I questioned whether I'd done the right thing. But the results speak for themselves. Our relationship, though still imperfect, is stronger than ever because we've learned to communicate, to respect each other's needs, and to share the load. One of the most profound shifts has been in how I view my role as a grandmother. For so long, I thought being the best grandma meant saying yes to everything, no matter the cost to myself. I thought love was measured in the hours I spent babysitting, the meals I cooked, and the messes I cleaned up. But now I see things differently. Love isn't about sacrificing yourself to the point of burnout. It's about showing up fully, with an open heart and a clear mind. It's about being present, not just physically, but emotionally. When I'm with my grandkids now, I feel truly connected to them. I'm not distracted by resentment or exhaustion, and that makes all the difference. They sense it too. Their hugs feel tighter, their laughter brighter, and their joy more infectious. I've learned that being a grandmother isn't about quantity, it's about quality. And setting boundaries has given me the freedom to offer them the best version of myself. Emily and Jake have also grown in ways I didn't expect. Emily, in particular, has become more self-aware and considerate. She no longer assumes I'll always be available, and when she asks for help, it's with genuine gratitude instead of entitlement. Jake has stepped into his role as a father more fully, taking on responsibilities that once fell squarely on Emily's shoulders. Watching him read bedtime stories to the kids or take them on impromptu trips to the park fills me with pride. Our family dynamic has shifted in a way that feels healthier and more balanced. We've learned to support each other without leaning so heavily that we risk breaking the people we rely on. Of course, things aren't perfect. No family ever is. There are still moments of miscommunication or the occasional slip into old habits. But now we handle those moments with patience and understanding, knowing that we're all trying our best. Looking back, I'm grateful for the challenges we faced. They forced me to grow, to find my voice, and to stand up for myself in a way I hadn't done in years. They also reminded me of the importance of prioritizing my own well-being, not just for my sake, but for the sake of the people I love. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone in a similar situation, it would be this: boundaries aren't selfish. They're an act of love for yourself and for the people around you. They create space for healthier relationships and deeper connections. As I watch my grandkids run through the garden, their laughter ringing out like music, I feel a deep sense of peace. They still light up my world, but now I get to enjoy them on my terms. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.